Welcome to the Prayer Room. We explore growing your faith in Jesus Christ and how to surrender your life to Him. My name is Michelle Faust, and I am here. And today we have a special guest. So excited. His name is Karl Faase. Welcome, Karl Faase, to the show. Karl is the CEO of Olive Tree Media, presenter of Daily Nudge radio spots, and the host of Christian documentaries like Encounter. So, welcome.
Oh, Michelle, it's great to join you from the other side of the world.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing that this technology allows us to make these fantastic connections. So let the audience know, where are you from?
Well, I'm in Sydney, in Australia, and so we're in the. If anybody knows Sydney well, we're in the Sutherland Shire, which is about the sort of south part of Sydney, not far from about 8 kilometres from the beautiful Cronulla Beach. So that's a part of the world we're in.
That's amazing. Yeah, I've heard that Australia is absolutely beautiful. It's a place I hope to come someday to meet. So, really important question. Tell us, how did you meet Jesus?
Well, I always answer that question in an odd sort of way. I always answer that question by saying, let me tell you about my dad. So my dad came to Australia from Germany. He grew up basically in his younger years was through the Second World War. His dad left home very early. He never really knew his dad. He made a promise to his sister that he would follow her out to Australia. So he moved to Australia when he was in his mid-20s. Now, keep in mind, he came out of Germany and all the trauma of the Second World War, just awful. He ended up marrying my mum, who's Australian from a couple of generations, and they moved to a tiny farm in a very small place in, like 6 hours west of Sydney, and a tiny place. There's a little church there called St. Mark's, Tambar Springs, this place is called. You might want to Google it. It's in the middle of nowhere. And if you had 50 people in that church, it would be absolutely packed. And so my dad is working on a farm, and as a labourer with my mum. My brother and I had been born at the time, and the local minister was a guy from Sydney who had decided to take a call to this little church in Tambar Springs, miles and a tiny little place. And his wife had been quite impacted by the Billy Graham crusades in Sydney in 1959. And he decided that his name was Darrell Robinson, and he decided when he turned up Tambar Springs that he was going to run a mission. So he actually invited these two Sydney-based evangelists to come out, and everybody in town turned up to watch these city slicker preachers. And one of the people who turned up was my dad. Now, my dad had no spiritual background, no faith background, and he sort of listened to it all, and he chatted to a guy called John Turner, one of the two who ended up being quite well known in Australia, evangelists. And John Turner said to him, "Can I pray for you?" And my dad said yes, but he talked later and said, I wasn't actually that sure what prayer was. And he said in that moment, everything changed. And everything changed for him, and his life was different. And he then spent the rest of his life following Jesus and serving Jesus in different ways in ministry. And that changed the trajectory of our family, and that changed the trajectory of my life. And by the time I was 11, I was at an event, and I made a response to Jesus at that event. And that was pivotal for me because, none of us inherit faith. We all have to make our own choices to follow Jesus. But I'm not unaware that the choice of Darrell Robinson to leave Sydney and go to this tiny little church in the back blocks of New South Wales made a difference to my dad and made a difference to our family.
That's amazing. And it's so inspiring to hear just a legacy of faith and just the faith steps your family took. And I love the fact there's a connection to the Billy Graham ministry.
Yeah.
Because I have done a lot of research on his ministry, and it's amazing how that ministry impacted nations, and more than just, the America, but, Australia. That is amazing. That is.
Well, the 1959 Billy Graham crusades across Australia, he was actually here for 4 months. Wow. 25% of Australians actually went to see him. 1.25% of Australians made a response. That was 143,000 Australians. It's the closest that this nation has come to a revival. Quite remarkable. If you know anything about sport, anybody who's watching and knows anything about sport, one of the great sporting arenas of the world is the Melbourne Cricket Ground. Now, none of you know what cricket is, but just take my word for it. This place holds 99,000 people. I mean, it's a massive stadium. The record crowd that still held for the MCG was the 1959 Billy Graham closing event.
That sounds about right, because he had some large events that happened, but that is just amazing. And my husband and I went to the Billy Graham Center here. It's in the States, and they actually have his traveling pulpit that he took with him on his crusades. It's so cool, but it's awesome to see the impact of that ministry. So I have a question for you. You're y'all to preach and teach, but how did you know that you were actually sent? Because you got to know that you can't just kind of just shoot off the boot there. Like, how did you know?
Well, it's an intriguing little story that, Michelle. Longish story, but I ended up doing some study, and it was in social work, social welfare. And I was in that couple of years of study. I thought to myself, I really felt called that I wanted to work in a Christian ministry, and I wanted to work with young people. This was a long time ago when I was young, and I actually applied for a job at a local church. The really interesting thing is this is seriously 40 years ago. And there were three people that interviewed me for that job. One of them was the minister of that church. The other two are still people I know. In fact, I bump into them at committee meetings here in Sydney. And they gave me a job as a youth worker in a local church. Now, keep in mind, I just wanted to serve in a role that helped young people in a Christian environment. But while I did that role, and I was asked to, clearly given an opportunity to preach. And it was one of those moments where you think, where it was like, wow, I'm actually not too bad at this. And I don't say that because I sat down and thought, wasn't I fabulous? The responses coming back to me, and I've got to tell you, I basically failed high school. I was a terrible student. There was no sort of academic background for me. So the notion of teaching, preaching, communicating was something that was a total surprise. But it was that moment where I thought, the small church, it was a middle-sized church, I guess, but the small church for American standards, with a youth ministry that no one's ever going to write up in the annals of missional history across the globe. But it was actually really positive, and I just felt like quite alive in the role. So it wasn't one of those moments where I was sitting around thinking, what should I do? And there was this, angel moment. Some people have those, and that's fantastic, where you feel sense of call to be there. It was more a sense of, as I was doing ministry, God kind of just placed on my heart that this is what I should do full time. And from that, I actually went on to study, did a degree in theology, and then have been in ministry ever since.
Yeah, that's amazing. I was thinking about the concept. Actually, I teach a Bible study, and I taught this a little bit today about how God will give us a little bit and see how we steward it. And then he'll give us a little more and a little more, and he'll kind of walk us into where he's calling us to go. And a lot of times, like what you were saying, like it's kind of unexpected, and it's just cool how the Lord will move us at his will, and he knows what we're capable of before we know we're capable of, but it comes with those small invitations that are responded to consistently over time. So
yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting, Michelle, because I think it's really important for everybody to keep that in mind. Mm-hmm. That it's not like you can't get called independent of the church and other people. Mm-mm. And you actually need other people to say, you know what, you feel called, but we see that call. And it's the combination of those two things that are actually quite powerful.
It is. There's an interaction, because you could have the gifting, but the Lord will give you the leadership to identify that gifting and move you into that gifting and equip you to use that gifting. And it takes patience. It takes trust in the Lord. I have the same season going on right now. I do teaching and I do Bible studies, and there's been a little bit of a progression, and I'm also going into children's ministry as well. So working with you. So your story is a little bit encouraging over here. This sounds a little bit familiar. So,
that's great.
But I love how the Lord works this. I mean, he is God. He has so many similarities, but like with his people, like you are in another country and you have a little bit of similarities what I'm seeing over here. So the Lord is just amazing in how he works with his people. There are some staples that happen with his people. So question for you. May you please share the most precious moment of your tenure in ministry?
Well, It's an interesting thing to think about that, because I've been in ministry for a long time now. And so it's a real mixed bag. I think when I stepped into senior leadership at where I ran a church for 20 years, that was significant. In the way that came around was odd and unexpected, and that was very significant. I think, and standing on a platform with my wife Jane and 3 young kids being put aside, stood, prayed for, and set aside for ministry and leadership in that place, that was really significant. Baptizing my 3 children, one at a time at different times, that was really significant. So that was a very precious moment. And while there's lots and lots, let me just give you one last one. I spoke at a church earlier this year, I spoke at a church that I worked at before I was a senior pastor, and I worked there literally 35 years ago was when I left. And I spoke there this year, and then afterwards, a young man spoke to my wife. I was caught up with other people and didn't get to talk to me. So he said, I'm going to email Karl. It took a while, but about a month later, I got this email, and this was precious. Here is this guy who's now in his 40s. In fact, he'd probably be older than that now. He's got adult children. And he talked about how that time when I was in the leadership role in the local church with him as one of the guys in the youth ministry, how that became a template for him. And and then he just actually talked about the things he's done in his life. And he thanked me for the small role I had all those years ago. And it's that reminder that you just don't know. You just don't know what legacy you're leaving.
I do believe you're right, because a lot of times the Lord will have us in what we think are mundane moments. And yet we don't realize down the road how impactful these moments were. So we can never say, what we're doing is not important, because the things we call unimportant, God is like, this is actually a pivotal moment for somebody. And you just do not realize the impact you are having on a life or your kids' lives. And one thing I'm so inspired of what you said is that the baptism of your kids, like your family, was part of your moments of ministry. And I just want to commend you on that, because a lot of time ministry, takes family and either shoves it off, or there's an unhealthy balance between ministry and family. So that's just very inspiring that you've identified, an interaction there with your family. I think a lot of people need to hear that, because ministry, your family is more important than ministry. They definitely come first, and they are a ministry. They totally are. So all right, next question. Pivoting to your current journey at Olive Tree, what brought you at Olive Tree Media, what brought you to doing Christian documentaries? Well,
I when I was leading a church here in Sydney, I was kind of dabbling in media, and somebody had asked me to host a television show. I did that for a while, then I did another one, and then because I was hosting some television shows, another group asked me to do radio spots, and I was very brave and said, I'll try and do 40. That would have been 15 years ago. I've now done basically 1,000 of these spots, and they're played all over Australia, all over New Zealand, and a bunch of places. And so in kind of dabbling in Christian media, and then realized that in chatting to Jane, my wife, and I, after leading in a local church for 20 years, that we believed it was the right time to step out and do Christian media full time. Christian media has a mixed review. There are a lot of people that might be watching this who have seen some Christian media that let's just say hasn't been great quality, and that's often been the case in Australia, and we were very committed to do great quality, and we did a couple of series which I won't worry you about, but there was one that we wanted to do called Towards Belief, diffusing the belief blockers of our time. That's quite old now, but we chatted to a guy who has become quite a good friend of ours, and his name was Simon Hunter, and he's a director. He'd worked as a writer in Hollywood. He taught film and television here in Australia. And as we chatted about this apologetic series, diffusing the belief blockers of our time, one of the things that we talked about was, rather than me being the expert, in other words, we come on and I talk for too long, but that my role is as the host interviewer, and that we do it as a documentary style. So that what happens is I would say, basically raise a particular issue, like let's take the issue of suffering. And I would raise the issue of suffering at the beginning. Now, while I don't say this out loud, essentially the theme is this is a significant issue. We all know it's an issue. Why don't we go and talk to the people that will give us some answers about how we deal with suffering? And we did it in a documentary style. We actually filmed Towards Belief in Australia, America, and England. Then we did Jesus the Game Changer, which is how the life and teaching of Jesus changed the world and why it matters. And that's Towards Belief is like intellectual apologetics. Jesus the Game Changer is cultural apologetics. And that series we produced in Australia, America, India, Europe, some part of Europe, and also the UK. And each of these that we're expanding and going globally, but using great people, beautiful production values, wonderful editors, and the great strength in this is the editing as well. So the idea is to try and produce material that you could show to your friends, and basically they might not agree with the content, but you're not ashamed of the content. There's no cringe factor in watching this. They're easy to watch. They're beautifully produced. And that way we serve the church.
That is brilliant. I need to watch some of your documentaries because that sounds like it's so needed in today's world. And apologetics is something that I know from where I'm from, it's not widely taught. It's very, very needed. That's an absolutely beautiful thing. So I'm going to ask you the next question. What vision or dream do you have for your ministry?
When I left college, one of the last things we did in theological college was we went away in this retreat. And I'm not the sort of retreat guy, Michelle. So, and then what was worse, they said, okay, you need to go away by yourself and basically sit by yourself and see what God is saying to you. Again, that's not necessarily something I do a lot of. But in that moment, I was actually given a vision and a dream, which was that here I am at the end of my life, and I'm looking at something I've written down, and I'd written it down when I was in college. And it was that God had put on my heart to impact Australia for Jesus. Now that has been my dream and my vision all of my life. And whether that's in the local church, whether it's a bunch of different ministries I've been involved in, several of which I've begun as independent ministry groups, influencing the church and to influence our community. All of our documentaries, all of the radio spots, my speaking and my preaching is to impact Australia for Jesus. So everything we do is that's our dream, that's our vision.
That's fantastic. And that's a beautiful vision. I know it's a huge missions field over there. And I love the power of media and what you are doing, because when you stand in a church, you're only able to impact those people. But the media, it can take it far, it can take it wide, yep. And it can impact so many people. It's amazing. So next really important question, how can we pray for you and support you?
Well, right now, our key prayer is in the area of the series that we've just released called Encounter. People Jesus met then and now. I won't go into all the background of Encounter. Our team think it's probably one of the best we've actually ever produced. It's a stunning series. And again, it's filmed in America, in Australia, and in England, and in Ireland, and in Africa. And we want to see, so our prayer right now, is that many people would see Encounter, that many churches would use it, and that many people would be impacted and influenced by in Jesus through this series. So that's our prayer today, right now.
You definitely will keep you in prayer. And that sounds like the cinematography is going to be absolutely beautiful for that. Those seems like some awesome places that you have gone. So we're going to get to the 3 tactics. If you had 3 things you could tell somebody to encourage them, just tactics in their faith, what would they be?
I mean, I think the 3 things, and the interesting thing is that they're not really, kind of rocket science. The first is, 1, have a devotional life. Now that sounds so dull and boring, but if you don't have a personal relationship with Jesus that you're feeding every day, then your ministry long-term will not survive. And there's a chance it'll become shallow, and there's a chance it'll be derailed. And people over the years, I've often spoken to people who say, well, Karl, I do my devotional life when I'm preparing my sermons. Well, I want to be a bit strong on this. No, you don't. That's your job. That's your ministry role. When are you sitting down, not preparing for anything, not preparing for a Bible study, not preparing for a talk, and you're just in God's word, and you're asking what God is saying to you, and you're praying, and you're doing that regularly, and you're reflecting on both of those things. So one, have a devotional life to feed your own soul. Second, have laser-like focus on your integrity. Now, the reason I say that at the moment is because across the Western world in the last 20 years, Christian leadership and ministry integrity has failed dismally, and it's failing the church, and it's failing the people we lead, and it's just not a great look. That's not what we're called to do. And I think right now, for this time, right now, having integrity, trust what you say, be truthful, be honest, deal with money well, all of that. Don't have inappropriate relationships. Just laser-like focus on integrity. And thirdly, not rocket science, thirdly, keep turning up. I think one of the things that we often feel as we look around and we're looking for the superstar, we're looking for the person with these great gifts, we're looking for people who have just kind of remarkable skills, remarkable gifts, and we think that's where the future is. And yet over the years, because I've been doing this for a few years now, you actually see all these people who seemed like the superstars that have all just kind of dropping off and disappearing. And the interesting thing is sometimes it's not the superstars that make the biggest difference for the kingdom of God, that the people who keep turning up, the people who have a personal devotion life, the people who have a laser-like focus on their integrity, who love Jesus, love their family, love their ministry, love their church, and give themselves to it. And even when they're feeling like totally at the end of their tether, even when they feel like things aren't going so well, even they're sometimes wondering why they're doing what they're doing, they keep turning up.
I cannot agree more with the three things you have said. It is so refreshing to talk to a leader that understands this. And I will go point by point here, because when you said have a devotional life, I've heard it said that all authentic ministry comes as an outpouring of an already existent relationship with Christ. If you do not have a devotional life, and I'm with you, like you cannot just be studying for a sermon. Like you have to have, yes, you will have times you're studying for a sermon, but you have to have times when you're just sitting and you're quiet and you're just spending time with the Lord. Like he is not a means to a message. You have to have that relationship, or else your ministry will have no longevity. And I think it leads to things, because if you don't have that solid devotional life, then you're not going to have the laser focus with the purity of your ministry, and you're going to walk into compromise as the doorway straight out of ministry. And it comes from not having that integrity. And you're right, like Western Christianity has been void of integrity for a long time. And you get these leaders that are huge that have this chaos in the background, and then they go over and have these big ministry fails. They didn't fail on the day they had infidelity in their marriage. They failed when they failed to have integrity in the small things. And it probably started with not having a devotional life to have that foundation and then keep turning up. And I think God is looking for people who are available, that will simply show up, that he can use. And when you said that, it reminded me of about a couple months ago. The Lord was like, "Will you still show up?" I'm like, "Yes." Like, it doesn't matter how I feel. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It doesn't matter if it feels like I'm not significant. Like, God, if you show up and are consistent and you have integrity and you have a relationship with him, there's no bounds to how he is going to be able to use you. Like I teach about surrender myself, and it's just like surrendering ourselves to be used. Really, I think that could be like a 3-point sermon. You just give points like, this is how you be in ministry. And may I please ask how many years you have been in ministry?
Well, I'm 64 now, and I started at 21.
Yeah.
So that makes a few years.
It's just a few. And yeah. I'm going to say that you've lasted so long because you have those foundational things. I mean, ministry is really hard. And if you don't have those foundations, you will not last.
Yeah. And look, I've been blessed to work with great churches. Our organization, Olive Tree Media, is small, but it's, just a real blessing. But, way back then, I married well, Michelle. And that my wife Jane and I are partners in ministry. She's the producer of everything we produced, and that's a gift and significantly important.
Yeah, I think the most successful people in ministry have spouses that come alongside them. Like my husband is my biggest supporter for everything I do. And one of the biggest confirmers of ministry is the support of that spouse, because if they don't support you, you just do not have the stability to run with it. And, two people who love Jesus running together are a powerful combination. So I'm going to give you the floor and just let you say this, share something that you would want to do. Before I give you the floor, I want to thank you for being here. I think you are a voice of reason, a powerful person for the gospel. I'm excited to see what happens with your documentaries and to watch your documentaries and just follow you and just get to support you and pray for you. I'm just I don't believe things happen by chance, and I'm so thankful that I got to have a conversation with you. Thank you so much for being here.
Just a thought to finish with, and it's really about to remind us all in Western nations that we're actually in a new age. We're actually in a new space for evangelism and mission. If you go back 10 years, the new atheists were a big deal. Everybody was kind of interested in the new atheists. They were all over the place. And then they disappeared very quickly. And humanity abhors a void. And into that void has gone other kind of spiritual religious movements, but they're not actually other religions. They're ideologies that function as religions. And right now, in the midst of that spiritual void, there's an opportunity for the gospel. And there's an opportunity, and this is what our new series is about, Encounter. There's an opportunity for people to have an encounter with Jesus. And I think, in talking with people in the UK and the US, that the Spirit of God is actually working in quite remarkable and unique ways right now. And we can have confidence that the Spirit is moving in people's lives. We chatted to people in England, in Ireland, here in Australia that have had encounters with Jesus, not that they were looking for, but that Jesus turned up in quite remarkable ways. I won't tell you any of the stories other than to just remind you that the Spirit of God is at work. We're in a new age. There's an opportunity for the gospel that I think hasn't been around in a particular way over the last little while, and to encourage all of us to refocus ourselves on sharing Jesus in appropriate, thoughtful, and culturally appropriate ways. But in the midst of all of that, just be there, turning up, sharing Jesus and seeing what God is doing and recognizing that God is there before us. And the Spirit of God is working before us, and we're actually cooperating with the Spirit of God to bring Jesus to new life, to bring people to new life and new faith in Jesus.